This week is packed with news events. And it's not only for the mainstream financial markets, it's also for the crypto markets. Take a look over here. We have the US CPI this week coming in, the Fed chair testimony, the PPI data, the Bank of Canada rate decision. If that wasn't enough, we also have July 13 to July 17, which is a suspected potential Senate floor vote on the Clarity Act. Then we also have a committee hearing on the Clarity Act educating people about the act in New York. Combine that with the news events of what's happening with US and Iran. There's a lot of hot topics to discuss. Brent crude is on the rise again. Micron Tech and Nvidia both breaking out of bearish price actions, followed by Bitcoin as well. So that will be interesting to cover. And then Ethereum as well, showing relative strengths with some higher highs and higher lows. All of this we'll cover in this week's video. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strategic Markets, your place for technical and fundamental analysis all at once across many markets. Now, into our end of week session. This week is packed. We have the US CPI data coming. This is going to be massive. On the cusp of America and Iran still being at war, I don't see how important this is going to be because there's still fear and uncertainty and doubt. But with that being said, obviously it's going to have an impact as to what Kevin Warsh has to say because he will be saying something this particular week. We've been covering this for a while, but July 15th, he will be speaking from the Senate Banking Committee about the semi-annual monetary policy. I'm projecting that for the future. So that's definitely interesting news there. But it's also a very hot topic for crypto. You have a potential Senate floor vote on the Clarity Act happening, which if it progresses through, it could go to the House as well. Look, that's not 100% confirmed, but that is the discussions that's been happening in terms of news or mainstream media. So if this actually does progress ahead this particular week, which I'm a little bit skeptical of, but if it does, then this is massive news. Combine that with the fact that this is confirmed that there will be a committee hearing on the impact of Clarity Act, particularly held in New York itself. That's going to be massive because now we're starting to have these discussions from a legislative background perspective. So a lot to will be coming through this particular week, which is going to have an influence on price action there. Now, with that being said, I wish things were different over here, but the US and Iran war is pretty much back on. There have been lots of vessels struck. Basically, both of them are exchanging strikes with each other like there's no tomorrow. I particularly did have a little bit of a conspiracy theory that what if the Memorandum of Understanding was just a ploy for Trump to basically take a bit of a break, get an understanding or intelligence on where the attack sites of Iran are and just to strike them again. And to a certain extent, that did happen because at the end of the day, in the standoff, tension spiked because Iran allegedly attacked commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, and then America responded back with 80 Iranian military targets to be struck. So were they taking this time to just basically gather intelligence and then strike back so that they do get their victory that they wanted, and also take this particular time to restock and reload? It's a perspective. Now, it will take some time to progress ahead, and if that is how they progress ahead and, let's say, win a war, then it will be considered a very strong strategy. But for that aspect, though, it's just right now going to take an impact on the price of oil. And we discussed this last week, but Brent crude did break out of the 20-week SMA line over here and is likely, which, if no negotiations happen over the particular weekend or so, it's just going to head upwards and higher from here onwards. So we'll see how that progresses forward and, what fun new tactic Trump or the rest of the people have to manage this. But yeah, it's just something for you to be across. So definitely price action signaling right now a breakthrough of the 20-week SMA and move upwards possibly. On that topic though, something very interesting came out, and this is supporting of our last video. If you haven't seen that particular video where how China is basically killing the AI trade, particularly for America. Even Politico has now reported that the Trump administration is holding early stage discussions on how to respond to China's rapid expanding open source AI ecosystem. The Chinese AI models are gaining a lot of market share. They're basically delivering very cheap cost AI, and they're basically letting people they're open sourcing it, so anyone can basically use that based on their own hardware. They don't have to have a data risk of it being stored somewhere else. This is putting a lot of pressure. This was unwinding the AI trade as well, but we'll see how that is managing up right now. Whether that continues to unwind is going to be a very interesting topic. But America is preparing for that because they're starting to understand that by consistently restricting their AI models and losing contracts and whatnot, people are basically just going over to China. So watch our last video if you haven't on that, because that covers it a lot. But how that is affecting the US bond market as well, this is a very interesting point of discussion too, and we're going to keep covering it for a bit. Right now, the difference between the 10-year yield and the 2-year yield is not that high. It's only at 0.4%. It is higher from what we covered last week. So if that goes towards an upwards trend, that would be great. But right now, we definitely need this to be a stronger spread so that, long-term growth is taken at a better perspective than just people wanting to invest in short-term growth in the near future. But on that though, when we do talk about short-term growth, when you look at Micron Tech, we covered last week that yes, it did have a fall of about 29%, near 30% or so, but it was forming with this, descending wedge pattern, which it had a breakout of, right? And generally speaking, look, the AI trade unwinding and possibly being negative, we did call and we did say this is a bit overheated. So, if you went down 30% with it, or if you did call a short over here, you probably would have been well off for it. But if I'm sitting over here right now, and then I also look at Nvidia, which is forming a similar pattern and making a strong move upwards as of Friday this particular week, or if you want to call it last week, combine that with the fact that the SPX is also breaking out of this triangle reasonably fast and then making its move upwards as well. As much as I would like to have a thesis and belief that the markets are going one way or another, at the end of the day, market decides, and market can stay unreasonable way longer than we can stay reasonable. So if it does decide to act bullishly, and funnily enough, as we've been having this war with, US Iran, we were just moving crazy numbers high. So if there's anyone profiting from this particular war, and if tech is profiting from that because AI models are being used to assist in the war, who knows? But somehow this particular economy seems to move higher when there is war. And, thankfully or sadly, I'm not part of a warmonger society. So in that particular case, I don't really choose to take a profits from it directly. But I have noticed that at the end of the day, the market is moving in an upwards direction when there seems to be war. So if that's a correlation and that you choose to follow, then yeah, it's probably not a bad idea to be long or positives in the market right now. But particularly so, that's not the thesis that I particularly take, and therefore can't really advise on that. Similar to Russell, though, when we do take in consideration, just because the spreads that we covered in the US yield aren't that great, and no one's really making money in terms of short-term to long-term yield spreads, Russell is also actually not moving up because people just don't have liquidity right now to grow small to mid-cap businesses. So in that particular case, we're just stuck on this particular $3,000 psychological figure. The moment we do start moving up on that, though, it'd be fairly exciting for me to see. And I think in that particular aspect, copper versus gold as well could also be having an upward trajectory from there onwards. But similar to how Russell's been moving sideways, copper versus gold has just been moving sideways as well. So they could be just correlated right now in terms of showing us short-term risk. But in correlation to tech stocks, Bitcoin has been doing some interesting price action as well, where we were having this particular downtrend, especially on the top section, and we have broken out of it, tested it for support, and now possibly are ranging upwards as well. But this is also a bit of a descending wedge pattern, though, that we are breaking up from. Based on the news events of Clarity Act and what's coming this week, the market could be getting pushed up a little bit because people are getting excited. And you can see over here, we were forming lower lows as well, and we've just broken out of this particular price action, but we haven't formed any higher highs just yet. So we haven't had a particular trend change, though. This will be a little bit different as we look into Ethereum in a particular second. There is some differences as to how these two are performing with each other. But the reason why at least us breaking out of this particular downtrend is important and good to note, and some data points that support that, is the Bitcoin ETFs. They're showing signs of life again. But, first positive week since May, we have recorded an ETF inflow of about $197.4 million. So that's definitely suggesting that, hey, people are now seeing a positive opportunity in this, that, this is really oversold and they want to go into it, considering this is the first time since May. But that can't be that right now. It's not a confirmed signal or so, and we're still way far below from confirmation on that, because like we have covered on this particular 14-year trend line over here, and how right now we are below it, that is a little bit depressing. And at the same time, we are very below the Bitcoin support, Bitcoin bull market support band as well, sitting at about 69 to 71K. So if we have great price action or clarity act going into vote this particular week, that would be awesome. And I think I can see a bit of volatility happen coming back into Bitcoin's markets, because we do have this particular Bitcoin bearish, Bitcoin bullish divergence, with our side heading upwards and price going downwards. But yeah, we're just going to have to see through those particular news events going through. But on that particular topic, Ethereum and the recent daily price action compared to Bitcoin, which has been going lower lows and even higher lows, which was signaling still a bearish trend that we need confirmation to go over, Ethereum is actually forming a bit of a sideways action. But if you're really pertinent over here and if you really look specifically, this was a little bit of a higher low. So when you look over here and you draw this particular line from this to this is going a little bit higher. And this hasn't confirmed yet as a bit of a higher high, but if this particular week's price action does go above and we do have a little bit of a higher high, this will be positive for Ethereum's market share and possibly a bit of a signal that, hey, maybe there is an opportunity on Ethereum, and signaling some risk on strength, which is exactly what's been coming into Ethereum to Bitcoin charting as well. Ethereum has been showing strength against Bitcoin, and you follow that through in this particular chart as well, where I told you that right now we are showing strength and we're touching this particular resistance. So if Clarity Act pushes through and this particular chart has a breakout, definitely be across risk on narratives, particularly in the crypto space. And we'll be covering that as soon as that happens. Again, nothing is confirmed yet, but yeah, that will be a very interesting point, because a lot of people calling for October lows, but any changes in, legislative activity relative to crypto could be massive for this particular space. So we'll keep you posted on that. But on that, we will pass it over to Steve and see what his thoughts and what he's seeing on the technicals.
Excellent summary there, Yash. Terrific job bringing a lot of different fundamentals and a lot of different aspects together, especially in terms of all the different paradigms that are going on. Let's start with Ethereum directly, as you've actually been discussing that right away. Now, some very, very intriguing aspects going along there. Over the last couple of weeks, we've really been focusing particularly on the 50-day moving average, being this blue line here when it comes to Ethereum. We have cleared that over the last couple of days. Now, whether or not we actually come back and test that again and stay above it is going to be a very, very interesting aspect overall. We are above the short-term moving averages as well as the quarterly VWAP at this point in time. So looking okay from that perspective. However, we still haven't cleared above this resistance area from April 2025, which is a fascinating thing. Even though we are seeing some more relative strength, or potentially some more relative strength, when it comes to Ethereum. So keep an eye on that and observe. But we take a look over at Bitcoin's aspects. When we look at that, we are above the support level there, which was previously resistance from back over in April 21. So we're getting a few mixed signals when it comes to cryptocurrencies overall here. We're above a lot of these short-term moving averages there, as well as that quarterly VWAP as well. So things are looking a little bit more positive in terms of aspects there from Bitcoin. And on top of that as well, we've actually had a crossover. You can notice that on the Ichimoku on the left-hand side, a crossover of the Tenkan-Sen blue line above the baseline. That's usually a positive sign overall. Remember, we were talking about this from Ethereum's perspective last time. We'll switch back to Ethereum for a tick. And the reason why we were talking about that from Ethereum was the blue Tenkan-Sen blue line had actually crossed above that baseline, or was about to cross over it last week. And we actually had mentioned that in Wednesday's video, that in fact that it actually had just crossed over at that point in time. You can see it's really, really firmly crossed over it towards the end of the week. So things are looking a little bit more positive in different aspects. So once again, watch this space. Now, whether or not we're starting to see a little bit more sector rotation coming into the Qs and the SPY a little bit more, moving away from the Dow, could be the situation that we're actually seeing overall as well. Let's look at each of those in turn. But before we look at that, let's have a look at what's going on with the volatility. Now, overall with volatility, that has just sunk through the floor, even though we had a bit of a spike midweek. So midweek in Wednesday, we saw this big spike. It went all the way back up to around about 18.919, let's say, in terms of rounding it off, which actually got it right back up to the 200-day moving average and 150-day moving average, being the red line and the orange line respectively. Got up to that point and then sunk straight back down through the day. Now, that actually did happen intraday in terms of the volatility in that day. Lots of war talk, lots of different things going on in that particular day over in the US markets. Ever since then, the volatility has sunk right back down to monthly lows, and that's what happened throughout the rest of the week. This has corresponded with the actual SPY itself being the top 500 stocks reaching new recent highs. So we've swung back up off the 50-day moving average being that blue line. So overall, things looking a little bit more positive in the broader market of the top 500 stocks of the US market. And on top of that as well, we've actually had the Tenkan-sen blue line crossover above the baseline. So things are looking a little bit more positive in the grand scheme of things. The lagging indicator hasn't crossed above the unit price as yet. However, it has bounced off that Tenkan-sen blue line. So another positive aspect overall there. When it comes to the Qs, similar situation in terms of what's going on with the unit price. A bounce off the short-term moving averages as well as the quarterly VWAP, and we've also had a test of the 50-day moving average. It went below the 50-day moving average, but bounced very, very firmly off those levels. We haven't got the same response here with the lagging indicator as yet in relation to the Qs, but we've had a bit more of a pronounced, prolonged reaction with the Tenkan-sen blue line above the baseline. So overall, some positivity rolling back into the Qs at this stage. But what's been going on with the Dow and also with the Russell? Well, let's have a look at the Dow first. In terms of the Dow, we haven't really had a break below the 15-day moving average at this point at all. It's just bounced off it, come right back up above it, and continuing on its merry way at this point. Not as strong, so to speak, as what we've seen in all the others, but overall, the trend hasn't broken. The blue Tenkan-sen line still moving along quite nicely, nowhere near the baseline overall. It's just basically had this retracement, come back down, cooled off a little, and now just moving on its merry way overall in terms of things. So the Dow still looking fairly strongish. And Tenkan-sen, the lagging indicator, I should say, just going along in terms of higher highs and higher lows. So just smoothly trucking along. When it comes to the Russell, though, out of the four, this is probably your weakest. And this will probably relate a little bit more in terms of the bonds, which we'll have a look at in a few moments. Overall, let's have a look firstly at the lagging indicator on the Ichimoku. As you can see, lower highs and lower lows. We can really see when we have a look at all of these four indices together, this is definitely along the lines of one that's showing a few warning signs overall. Reason why is we've got that lagging indicator, not looking the greatest overall. We're still battling against these short-term moving averages, even though we bounced off this 50-day moving average. So take a look at that aspect there. A good positive, though, is this Tenkan-sen blue line is really going quite strong above the baseline. So that's actually quite positive overall there. But we've got a few wicks at the top here. We've had some tests. We've come back down, a few little things here. So there's still a little bit of caution going on overall. And when we take a look at the bond market, we can probably see the reason why the Russell is struggling a little bit more there. We've been saying this over the last month for ad nauseum aspects overall, really, in relation to the fact that as the bond market goes down, potential for the interest rates to rise, putting pressure on the Russell. And it's really starting to show through in terms of things overall. And we are still well below the September lows, which can really indicate in terms of the bonds in particular, more pressure on the bonds, more pressure on the interest rates, those kind of aspects there. We are still really at multi-month lows. This level here in terms of the bonds has not been seen since around about late May. So these are the kind of aspect that we're looking at overall here. We're well below the September lows. We're well below the short-term moving averages. We're well below the quarterly VWAP being that pink line as well. We're well below the 50-day moving average as well, and well below all of those other moving averages there too. So there's quite a lot of selling pressure at the moment in terms of the bonds, and whether or not that remains for quite some time, that's anyone's guess. The interest rates themselves still well above all the short-term moving averages, the 50-day moving average, and all the other moving averages as well. So there's a lot of movement going on in relation to the bond market. And will we see any relief in relation to all of these bonds? Well, to tell you the truth, I don't think that's going to be the case, considering we've got the lagging indicator making higher highs in terms of the bond yields, and we've just had Tenkan-Sen blue line creep above the baseline. So overall, with that, as well as the unit prices being above the cloud, I would hazard to say that it looks as though a higher for longer in terms of interest rates is more than likely the situation for a while yet, unless we have the unit price coming below the cloud anytime soon, which at this point probably is not going to be likely. In relation to the dollar still remaining quite stubborn, even though we are having lower highs and lower lows in the grand scheme of things in terms of the long term. We're starting to see higher highs and higher lows in the short term with a lagging indicator. And on top of that as well, we really are seeing a long-term trend in terms of the Tenkan-Sen above the baseline as well. So overall, we are really seeing a long-term trend which has not been broken for some time, even though we are seeing in the short term lower highs and lower lows. It's just not a trend that's actually breaking at any point in terms of the dollar. And as we know, people generally tend to get a bit more averse when it comes to the markets in relation to a very, very strong dollar. We'd really like to be seeing that coming back down to around about the 100 even mark for things to be relatively stable overall. So that's all of those aspects overall. Now we've covered Bitcoin, we've covered the markets overall in terms of things in general. Let's cover gold. Okay, what's happening here? Not really much over the past week. It's just really just sitting there going, we can't really decide where we're going to go. But it's beneath a lot of the long-term resistance areas that we've been talking about for around about October. And we're pretty much just sitting just underneath the short-term moving averages, and we're sitting pretty much smack bang on the quarterly VWAP, being this pink line here. So overall, not really much happening there. The long-term Tenkan-Sen blue line is well below the baseline, so we're in a fairly much negative trend when it comes to gold overall, and that would need to pretty much come back up above this these pretty much above these resistance areas here before we start seeing any major uprising in terms of the gold price. Whether we're starting to actually form any trend here with a lagging indicator, we're not really seeing anything determining there at this stage. When it comes to silver, pretty much the same kind of trend overall we're seeing there as well. Nothing really being decided, which we can see as being the main reason why we're just seeing sluggish price action and no movement going on whatsoever in the grand scheme of things. Copper, well, Yash alluded to that in terms of what the circumstance was with that. And really, at this point in time, we are still pretty much just stuck at this point. We're slightly above some of the short-term moving averages because we're seeing a little bit of strength, but we're being constrained at this point in time by the 50-day moving average up above. We could be getting a little bit of extra strength coming through as we see the lagging indicator now breaking above the baseline. So that could be some interesting points going on there. But we probably want to be seeing, if you wanted to see extra strength in relation to the copper area, we'd want to be seeing the Tenkan-Sen blue line coming back above the baseline and seeing this all break up above the cloud to actually see some more bullish action in terms of copper coming up, and that would be supportive for the market overall. Iron ore, this could be starting to actually show some signs of life in overall here. We're starting to see some movement above the short-term moving averages and also above the quarterly VWAP as well. But we'd need to be starting to see some more higher highs and higher lows forming to actually see if we're hammering out a base overall. And we'd need to start seeing the same thing happening here with the lagging indicator in terms of high highs and higher lows, as well as starting to see that Tenkan-Sen blue line come back above the baseline as well. So a lot of more activity required overall with that there. So lots of dynamics at work there, my friend. I'll pass it back to you, and we've got the new week starting up, but I think it's all going to come down to a lot of that news and everything else that you were mentioning right at the beginning of the video. So let's have a look and see how everything does pan out. But yeah, lots of interesting times ahead, and of course geopolitical stuff and everything else there going on too. So keep an eye on those levels. Let's have a look and revert back on Wednesday and see what changes by then. But over to you, mate, for the concluding remarks.
Well, Steve, thank you for that. You've pretty much done my job. Look, the truth is, the news events are fairly stacked this particular week. And with the way the price action is going, and also with the way the war is going, it's just going to be a very volatile week. So prepare yourself well for that aspect. Steve's done an awesome job pointing out the technicals today. So with that being said, follow along as to how we confirm our next levels. But until then, thank you so much for joining us for this week's video. If you've liked
Thank you.
what you've seen today, please do drop us a like. It goes a long way. I would love for us to hit double digits today. We get so close with 8 likes or 9 likes. If we can get up 10 and above, that would be really great. So help us get there. If there's anything we can do differently or better, drop us a comment. It goes a long way. Thank you, Mark, for your ongoing support.
Incredible.
For today's word, let's go for CPI disaster. If you are here today and we are going to have CPI numbers come in, so is that going to be a disaster? Put that in and we'll give you a shout out for next week's video as well. But on that, if you've been enjoying this particular journey and want to come along with us, just give us that subscribe and watch our upcoming videos. But with it,
And even if you haven't been enjoying it, tell us what you're not enjoying.
yes,
Okay.
yes, rip into us, whatever you want to say. It's fine.
Absolutely.
But no, we've been having a lot of fun. We appreciate your
Oh,
support, guys. Thank you so much, and we will see you on the next one.
see you Wednesday, everyone.